Believe it or not, I have a few interests outside of Fire Emblem, and one of them is card games. When I was a kid, I loved collecting trading cards, even though I didn't really know how to play them. I even had a small collection of Neopets cards back in the day. When I got older, I got into Magic the Gathering, and prior to the pandemic, I was playing Magic a couple times a week. With that in mind, when Fire Emblem's card game Cipher arrived on my radar, I couldn't wait to play it. The only issue was that the cards were never released in English, so I've never been able to play. Now though, even though new Cipher cards aren't being produced anymore, it's basically never been easier to play for people that don't speak Japanese. I started playing online a couple months ago, and I've pretty much fallen in love with the game. I'm going to talk about why this ostensibly dead card game is so captivating, and how you can get set up playing online yourself if it appeals to you like it does to me. But first, a big thank you to my patrons, Helix, Aikipu, Lucy Sev, Van West, Acrobatic Jazz, A Family of Trees, Romeo, Tim Strait, Aaron Gedden, Emma, and Zakar. I really appreciate all of your support, and if you want to get early access to videos, shoutouts in videos, and have access to polls that influence the content schedule, you'll find a link to the Patreon in the video description. Alright, so back to Cipher, and first I'm going to talk about why this game is so cool, especially if you're a Fire Emblem fan. If you already know you want to play the game and you just want to know how, go ahead and skip ahead to the timestamp in the video description, but if you need some convincing or you just want to hear me gush about the game for a bit, stick with me here. The first thing that jumped out at me about Cipher was the artwork and the way that people gravitate towards playing decks based around the characters they love. Cipher includes characters from the start of the series all the way to 3 houses, so with some exceptions, chances are your favorite characters probably have cards. And with them, usually some very impressive artwork. Cards even have alt arts that let you express yourself a bit by choosing which version goes in your deck. This may not seem like a big deal, but for me, having some of the most aesthetically pleasing versions of my favorite characters is great, and it makes playing the game more fun, especially for older characters or more obscure characters that don't have a lot of official art or even fan art. Some of my favorite card arts are the alternate arts, where the artist experimented a bit more or made a nod to series history. One of my favorite pieces of artwork in the game is this Ninian artwork that is positively adorable. And my favorite deck likes to use an alternate art of Marth that throws back to his Fire Emblem 1 appearance because I really like that game. So one of the cool things about Cipher is that it's one of the most expressive card games I've played. It's almost exclusively played by people that really like Fire Emblem, so people love playing decks built around their favorite units. Especially in casual games, I frequently feel like my opponent isn't just playing cards with me, but on some small level is sharing some piece of Fire Emblem that they love with me. And I love that. Cipher being a card game also gave the designers an opportunity to experiment with original characters and new outfits or appearances for classic characters. One cool thing they did in some cases was swapping the classes and outfits of 2 related units. My favorite version of this was with Maria and Minerva from the Arcanea games. Maria in the video games is a cleric and Minerva is a wyvern, but in Cipher there's a version of each of them where it's swapped, so Minerva is a healer and Maria is a flyer. It's really fun seeing the characters in a new way, and I'm particularly fond of Wyvern Maria as she's super strong and an important piece in my Marth deck. Plus the art is so cool, just look at it. So the gorgeous artwork and the presence of my favorite Fire Emblem characters was a big thing that drew me to Cipher, but another reason it appeals to the Fire Emblem fan in me is that they did a really impressive job of working the mechanics of Fire Emblem into the card game. Archers have 2 range and flyer effectiveness, mages have 1 to 2 range, there are critical hits and supports, you can promote your units. Specific cards even have features that make reference to Fire Emblem mechanics, such as Katria, Pala, and Est being able to buff each other for a triangle attack, or Marth having an alternate win condition where he seizes the throne that he can only activate if he's your lord. Oh yeah, there's another thing. Each deck in Cipher gets to pick a lord to represent their deck. You'll always have access to your lord, and you generally win the game by defeating the enemy's lord a handful of times. I love this mechanic because it's really fun picking a character that you like to represent your deck, and there are tons of viable choices. My favorites are Marth and Erica, but there's all sorts of strong decks you can build. I've played against Hannah decks, Nino decks, Boars decks, Pent decks, and more in my 2 months with the game, and all of them have played really interestingly. So I think they translated Fire Emblem mechanics into a card game in a really fun way. And when I was learning the game, there were all sorts of little discoveries that tickled me. like a card making reference to something a unit does in their game, or discovering that Echo's archers in Cipher are the only ones without flyer effectiveness, because in Shadows of Valentia, archers don't have flyer effectiveness by default until they equip a bow. There's a lot of cute attention to detail like that makes the game feel lovingly crafted for Fire Emblem fans. Also, I really like being able to pick a lord. My second favorite deck to play is an Erika deck that I really like specifically because I can have my favorite character of all time lead the deck. So those are some of the things that drew me into playing Cipher. I love the artwork, I love the references to Fire Emblem gameplay, and I love how people tend to gravitate towards playing decks based on their favorite characters or favorite games. The game is also pretty simple to learn and really fun, but with lots of opportunities for decision making. But it's kinda hard to explain why the game is fun before you know how it works, so let's talk about how to play. I'm going to be showing you how to play using a virtual tabletop software called Lackey. This is the one that the biggest community Cipher Discord I'm aware of uses, which I'll link in the description. There are step-by-step instructions there on how to set up Lackey and import the Cipher cards. It's pretty easy. I will also include some instructions in the description for how to set Lackey up, and what's great about Lackey is that once you have it set up, the translations are baked right into the system, so you can just hover a card, press a key, for me it's the tilde key, and that brings up the card's translation in English. Lackey isn't the only way you can play Cipher. I know some people prefer playing with Tabletop Simulator, and there are other options as well, but Lackey is what I use, so that's what I'll be showing you. Alrighty, let's get into the rules. To start each game, we draw 6 cards, and then we take the top 5 cards of our deck and place them face down in the orb zone. You can think of orbs like your life points in other card games. Anytime your lord or main character is defeated in combat, you take one of your orbs and add it to your hand instead of removing your lord from the battlefield. If your lord is defeated while you're out of orbs, you lose. In most cases, this means you lose the game after your lord is defeated 6 times. We also put our lord onto the battlefield before each game starts, so on turn 1, the game should look like this. My opponent and I each have 6 cards in our hand, 5 cards in the orb zone, and both of our main lords on the board. It's worth noting, if you draw your 6 cards and you really don't like them, you are allowed to mulligan once, which means shuffling your hand back into your deck and drawing a new one, but you have to keep the second hand if you do this. Speaking of lords, let's have a look at one. This is what a Cipher card looks like. You'll notice it has a 1 in the top left corner and 2 circles with numbers in them in the bottom left and bottom right corners of the card. That number in the top left is how much it costs to play the card from your hand. Normally, to play a card, you have to pay that cost, and we'll get into how to pay that cost in a minute, but the main exception to this is your lord, who will always be on the battlefield, so you don't have to pay to play them at the beginning of the game. The number in the lower left corner of the card is the unit's attack value, which we will use to determine who wins anytime 2 units fight each other. The number in the bottom right is the support value of the card, which will be easier to explain by showing you how combat works, so let's do that now. Let's say I decide to attack Erika with Marth. I would double-click Marth to turn him sideways. This is called tapping a card. You'll do this anytime you attack and sometimes when you take other actions. It is mostly used to denote that a card has already taken an action this turn. Once my attack has been declared, both my opponent and I get a chance to support our units. To do that, we take the top card of our deck and flip it face up. That will be our attacker's support partner. Conveniently, Lackey has a button to do this for us. So in this case, Marth is being supported by Sita and Erika is being supported by Happy. The number on the bottom right of each card is the card's support bonus. So Sita has a support bonus of 30 and Happy has a support bonus of 20. For both Marth and Erika, we take the support value of the support card and add it to the attack value of the card that's being supported, and then compare them. So in this case, Marth has 70, which is his attack of 40, plus Sita's support value of 30, and that's 10 more than Erika, who also has an attack value of 40, but is only receiving a support bonus of 20 from Happy. So Marth would win the fight here. Normally, when you win a fight, the opposing character is defeated and goes to the retreat pile. But lords have plot armor, so instead, Erika's player would remove one of her orbs and add it to her hand. If she were out of orbs, she would lose the game. Once the fight is over, regardless of who won, we would send our support cards to the retreat pile. One thing worth noting is that even if Erika had 10 more attack, Marth still would have won the fight because ties in Cipher always go to the attacker. One thing that's worth noting is if your deck is ever empty when you need to take a card from it, you resolve that by taking your retreat pile, shuffling it, and that's your new deck now. Alright, now let's look at another way that combat could have played out. In this case, Marth is supported by himself, while Erica is supported by Tana. Tana provides a support bonus of 30, so Erica has a total attack of 70 here. Now, Marth normally provides a support bonus of 20, but much like in the Fire Emblem video games, characters cannot support themselves, so Marth does not benefit from another copy of himself, leaving him at only 40 attack. We call this self-supporting. It's also important to note that when I say a character can't support themselves, I mean any version of the character. So even though these are two different Marth cards, they are both Marth, so they can't support each other. So Erica would win here and avoid Marth's attack. Fortunately for Marth, nothing bad happens when you miss, so neither of them are defeated, nobody takes any orbs, and if there's no more attacks to make, we probably move on to the next turn. The only other core mechanic for combat is range. You may have noticed that on my side of the board and my opponent's side of the board, there is a back row and a front row. Whenever you deploy a card, you can deploy them in the back or the front, and each card has a range. Archers, for example, usually have 2 range. That means they can only attack enemies 2 rows away from them. So if you have an archer in your back row, they can attack the opponent's front row. Or if they're in the front row, they can attack units in the enemy back row. So archers and mages are great for attacking from the back row without being in danger of being attacked by an opponent's 1-range attacker. You can also hide an important unit in the back row if you're afraid of them dying, because the back row is usually safer than the front row. But you need to be careful because if you don't have any units in your front row on your opponent's turn, then all of your back row units immediately move to the front, so you can't hide a unit back there forever. If you ever want to move a unit from row to row, you can do so by tapping them during your action phase. Basically, this means that you can move a unit once per turn, but if you do, that unit can't attack or use any other tap abilities. So that's the basics of how combat works. Let's next get into the general flow of a turn and how you play units. Let's say the game just started, we've got our full hand of cards and our lord on the battlefield. Well, the first thing we do on our turn is untap our cards and draw a card. Unless we're taking the first turn. You don't draw a card on your first turn if you are going first. So now that we've got a full hand, what's next? Well, if we want to play cards, we need to be able to pay for them. And we do that by playing bonds. Bonds are sort of like lands in Magic the Gathering, if you're familiar with that. They are a resource that we use to play other cards. Unlike Magic though, anything can be a bond, and you can play 1 per turn during the bond phase of your turn. So here, I am taking Shanna and placing her in the bond zone so that she can contribute 1 towards deploying other units. So I can now play units that have a deployment cost of 1, such as Fiora here. But I couldn't play Peony because she costs 3. So we probably won't be able to play her until turn 3 when we play our 3rd bond. This is also a good time to talk about colors. You may have noticed that cards are different colors. My Marth is red, for example, but my Fiora is purple, and here's why that matters. In order to play a card from your hand, you have to have a bond in your bond zone that shares a color with it. For example, I was allowed to play Fiora here because she's purple, and my Shanna in the bond zone is also purple. But I would not have been allowed to play Est, even though she also costs 1 because I don't have a red card in the bond zone and Est is a red card. On the other hand, if I had put Paula in the bond zone instead of Shanna, then the situation would be reversed and I'd be able to play Est but not Fiora because Paula would be a red card in my bond zone. Once we've placed our bonds and played what cards we want to play, we enter the action phase where we can use card skills, which I'll explain in a second, and make attacks. Again, unless we're going first. The first player to go can't attack on turn 1. Once we've made all of the attacks and used all of the skills that we want to use, we're done. We can pass our turn and our opponent will go next. That's the basic flow of the game. Each turn we start with the bond phase where we can place a bond, then go to the deployment phase where we can play cards, and then the action phase where we can use skills and make attacks. So now that you know how a turn flows, how to play cards, and how combat works, you actually know the basics of the game. But there's still a few specific mechanics to explain. First, class changing. You may have noticed that in addition to my 1-cost Marth, I have a few bigger Marths in the deck. So what's up with those? Well, those can basically be thought of as promotions for Marth. This Marth, for example, has a much higher attack value than the Marth I have on the board, but also a higher cost. Additionally, unlike other cards we've looked at, he has 2 costs, either 4 or 3. The top number is the cost if we just wanted to play the card. So if we didn't have a Marth on the board and we wanted to play this card, he would cost 4. Of course, we always have a Marth on the board, so we don't have to worry about that, because you can't have multiple copies of the same character on the board. Instead, since we already have a Marth, we can pay the second cost of 3 to place this bigger Marth on top of our small Marth. This is called class changing, and whenever you do it, you get to draw a card. Since your Lord is generally going to do a lot of combat, it's a good idea to run these bigger versions of your Lord so that you can promote them and make them stronger. You can also class change non-Lords provided that you put a couple different versions of the same card in your deck. There's also one more mechanic for combat. Let's say Marth is attacking Erica, but he self-supports, so he only has 40 attack, and Erica gets a ton of support, so she has 70 attack. Well, Marth would miss. But let's say I'm the Marth player and I really want to hit. Well, there is something I can do. Anytime you attack, you can discard a card with the same name as the attacking character to critically hit, doubling their attack power. So in this case, I could discard Marth by sending him from my hand to the retreat pile in order to double my attacking Marth's attack power, which would give him 80, and now he would hit. Now, let's say Erica's player really doesn't want to get hit. Maybe they're out of orbs, so they need the attack to miss. Much like the Marth player could discard a Marth, the Erica player can discard an Erica card to dodge the attack, no matter how much higher Marth's attack value is. I do this example with Lords, but you can do it with non-Lords too. I can make Est critically hit or dodge an attack by discarding another Est, for example. Okay, so the only major thing we have left to go over is skills. Most cards have a skill or two, and there are a few different types. Let's look at all of my Marths. My little baby Marth's first skill is a passive skill. It says that whenever I have more allies than enemies, if it's my turn, Marth gets plus 10 attack. You don't have to do anything to activate this. If you meet the conditions, it just happens. Our next Marth has a skill with a cost, and that's his skill 2, Seize in the Name of the Hero King. It says that during our action phase, we can tap Marth and 5 other units to win the game if the opponent is at 0 orbs. So many skills like this one have costs and conditions. Generally, if the skill's effect is better, the cost to activate it or the conditions to activate it are higher. There's one other special kind of cost that a lot of skills use that I want to talk about, and we'll see that on our third Marth. This Marth, when he defeats an enemy, allows you to flip 3 bond cards to untap all of your units. A lot of skills allow you to pay for them by flipping bonds. What this means is we take a card in our bond zone and we flip it over so it's face down. A face-down bond card can still be used to pay to deploy creatures, but it doesn't have a color and can no longer be used to pay for other skills. So if I were to flip all 3 of my bonds, I wouldn't be able to play any of my red or purple cards since I don't have any colored cards in my bond zone. However, if I were to add even a single face-up red bond to my zone, I can now go back to playing red cards, and flipped bonds can still contribute to their cost. Skills have all sorts of effects and costs, but the most common are tapping cards or flipping bonds. Some skills will also make exceptions to rules that I've discussed in this video. There's way too many cards to go over all of the skills here. Just know that it is normal for a skill to allow you to do something that you normally can't. There's one more type of skill called a support skill, and these are skills that trigger when a card is supporting another unit. So let's say Marth was attacking Erica and he got Fiora as his support partner. Well, Fiora has a support skill that allows you to move one of your allies to a different row. So since Fiora is supporting an attacking unit, I can activate that skill and move a unit if I want to. However, you'll note that her skill says attack support, which means it only works when she's supporting an attacking unit. If Marth were on defense, her support skill would not activate. There are some more nuances to how the game plays, but these are the very basics and enough to get you started. I'll also explain the very basics of deck building and how you can find opponents, or if you feel like things are still unclear, I'll tell you some places where you can ask some questions. For deck building, your deck should be a minimum of 50 cards, that's 49 plus your Lord. Generally, you want to stick to that 50 card minimum instead of going over it so that your deck's overall consistency is improved. You can have up to 4 copies of any one card in your deck. Your Lord has to be a 1-cost unit, so even if you really like Big Marth, you'll have to pick one of the baby Marths as your starting Lord, but you can always promote him later. You can include as many colors in your deck as you want, but for your first deck, I would recommend sticking to 1 or 2 colors. This will ensure that you're usually able to get the right bond colors and play all of your cards. Each color is associated with one or multiple Fire Emblem games, so red has Arcanea and Gaiden characters, black and white have Fates characters, blue is Awakening, brown is Three Houses, green is Tellius, purple is all of the GBA games, yellow is Yggdrasil, and colorless cards are a mix and can fit into any deck. So if you're not sure what color you want to go with, I would recommend just picking the one that has your favorite game in it. I wouldn't stress too much for your first deck about building a super powerful one, especially if you're going to be playing with fellow newcomers. I would start by finding a few of your favorite Fire Emblem characters and seeing which one of them has a card that jumps out at you and can be your lord. You always want to start by deciding on who your lord is, because remember, your lord is always going to be around. So you want your deck to complement the strengths of them or cover up their weaknesses. For example, Marth benefits from having a lot of units on the board, so my deck has a healthy supply of cheap units for me to play, and strong support units so that I can win more fights and keep my units on the board. Once you've picked your lord, you should add a few bigger versions of your lord for you to class change into. I like to run a lot of copies of my lord so that I can evade and save my orbs if I need to, and win more fights and crit when I want to. My Marth deck, for example, has 12 copies of Marth in addition to the 1-cost version that starts on the battlefield. Picking your lord also basically picks one of your colors. Marth is red, for example, so any deck that has him will at least be using red. And once you know one of your colors, you can just scroll through that section of the card list and pick which cards seem interesting to you or that synergize well with your lord. If you can't fill out a whole deck that way, you can always add a second color. Don't overthink it too much. Once you start playing, you'll be able to ask questions and learn more by seeing how other people build their decks. Okay, so you've got your deck, you know the basics, now you just need a place to play and a way to find opponents. And there's a few good options for this. I learned to play in the unofficial Cipher Discord, and I would highly recommend it as a place to play. They have a beginner's help chat, and the players there are happy to answer your questions, and when I started there, they even put me into a call, lent me a deck, and taught me step by step how to play. The server also hosts tournaments, including some specifically for beginner players. I'm playing in one of their beginner tournaments right now, and it's a lot of fun. If you don't want to compete but just play casually, they also have a match request channel for finding people that want to play casual games of Cipher. Though I would recommend if you're going to use that match request channel, you might want to mention that you're a beginner to whoever you're playing with, just so that they know. The server also has great detailed instructions on how to set up Lackey for the first time, which is great. Alternatively, there are other Discords you can find that play Cipher as well. We play casual games of Cipher in my own Discord, for example, so if you want to play with us, consider hopping in our Discord too. You'll find a link to both the Cipher Discord and my own in the video description. Anyway, I hope this video could clear things up a bit if you've been wanting to play Cipher. It's a really fun game, and I hope you'll try it. I've been having a great time playing it for the last couple months, and I think you will too. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you liked it, consider giving it a like or subscribe so that you never miss an upload, and have yourself a lovely week.